Question: how do you feel about Shia LaBeouf? Personally, it's a question I wouldn't know how to answer anymore. As an actor, he's someone that I've come around to big time, but growing up, I'd never watched Even Steven, so I was only familiar with his Transformers work. He was just a dude from Transformers for me, and Indiana Jones' son as well, I guess. Then I started to see more of him, but not on the big screen. There would be multiple headlines about him, ranging from alcohol abuse to his performance pieces, which people were ripping to shreds back then. And I never understood that, but now I can see that it allowed tabloids to paint this tragedy of this child actor gone off rails, which he then inevitably became a poster child for, along with that one image of Macaulay Culkin that did the rounds on every clickbait website known to man. One of his performance pieces, #AllMyMovies, which you might remember, was a live stream where people could tune in to watch Shia watch all his movies in a reverse chronological order that lasted 3 whole days. At the time, Wired magazine called this the Shia LaBeoufiest thing Shia LaBeouf has ever done. Although this won't mean anything to someone who's not familiar with what the child actor has been up to, but I think it paints a pretty good picture on how he was viewed at the time. Rather than his roles, he was someone that was most talked about for the image he had been creating for himself. Whether that's storming off of a press conference, the bag over his head at Berlinale that read, "I am not famous anymore," his "I am sorry" piece, where he passively sat in a blank room with the same bag over his head, his drunken arrest at a cabaret performance, the Just Do It videos that spread like wildfire on Facebook and 9gag at the time. Just do it! His other live stream where he repeatedly yelled, "He will not divide us" after Donald Trump's election, and a few others that I won't get into. People were fascinated with his mysterious and broken persona he had crafted for himself. He was quite an enigma, and he started to lean into that more and more with his on-screen roles, which is when I really started to pay attention to him. I'm talking about films such as Fury, Nymphomaniac, and a defining film for me, American Honey. Director Andrea Arnold is known to work with non-actors, and American Honey is no different. It's filled with fresh faces that she has scouted off the streets. Shia LaBeouf, as their so-called leader in the group, fits in with the rest of the misfits like a glove. Him being a Disney child actor is the last thing you would suspect. In an interview with Variety magazine, he had this to say: "I don't think I'd be working with the directors I've been working with if I had not fucked up a bit," he says. "They wanted a fucking fireball. They wanted a loose cannon. I'm learning how to distill my crazy into something manageable that I can shape and deliver on the day." He says he didn't have the tools to do that before. "I was an open wound, bleeding on everything." Just 2 years after American Honey, another film with honey in its title was on the horizon for Shia, and this time it was his own story written by himself in rehab. I'm of course talking about Honey Boy. This project saw Shia finally take control of his own narrative, whilst being open and vulnerable about his abusive childhood. A film that allowed people to step into his world and understand his troubled upbringing. It was a big and welcome comeback for Shia, and one that a lot of people have seemed to be very excited about. But since the release of the film, news of an abusive relationship with musician and co-star FKA Twigs, and confessions from Shia about taking creative liberties with the script have put the film in a puzzling place. And that's why I'm making this video. That's what I aim to explore here. How has Honey Boy aged? Let's go back to 2019, when the film was first being shown. I was able to watch the film at the London Film Festival at the height of its hype, with the attendance of Shia LaBeouf and director Alma Harrell, and I think Lucas Hedges was there as well. God, I think a lot of people were there actually, now that I think about it. I don't know, I think I have a picture. So there you go. These people were in attendance. It was a hot ticket event that me and my friend got into by queuing, and we were very, very excited to see it. The film had garnered a lot of hype with its announcement and headlines that read, "Shia LaBeouf to play his father in autobiographical film Honey Boy." But that hype only grew larger after winning the special jury prize in Sundance and getting very positive reviews. The film starts with Otis Lort. That's the pseudonym he goes by in the film. On a film set attached to strings, almost like a marionette being tossed around. We watch his fast-paced life as an actor, with the lines of reality and film sets getting more and more blurry. On top of this, we see him deal with alcoholism, which leads to his car crash that then gets him arrested and put onto rehabilitation. It is in rehab where he gets diagnosed with PTSD, which he repeatedly denies but is then forced to trace its history, looking back at his past as a part of exposure therapy. And title. The time jump parallels the start of the film, showing us that Otis's life on strings goes all the way back to his childhood. We watch his life as a child actor, living with his dad, James, a former rodeo clown and recovering alcoholic. Together they stay in a small motel room, and it's in these walls where Otis's trauma develops. His father is painted as a complicated figure, putting unjust pressure on a kid, allowing him to smoke and even being physical with him, whilst at the same time struggling with his own past. Although he doesn't show much love to Otis, we see that in his struggles he is ultimately someone who loves his child and wants the best for him. The film is not an easy watch, and it's heartbreaking watching someone as young as Otis deal with an unhinged and bitter father figure who's clearly not suited to be his guardian. In their relationship, it's almost like James is the kid that Otis has to look after, putting sense into him whilst also being the breadwinner. The film jumps back and forth between present-day Otis and him as a child, while he's taking steps to recovery at rehab, where he appears uneasy and unwilling to accept his trauma from the past. Young Otis, like any kid, is desperate to feel loved, which he doesn't receive from his father, but daydreams about in a heartbreaking scene, pushing him to bond and feel cared by a sex worker in their motel complex instead. Honey Boy was one of my favorites of the year when I saw it, and I was certain that it would be the film to change the minds of any Shia skeptic out there. He is undeniably great here as his father and subject of trauma, a role that clearly makes him channel something painful and sensitive. Him becoming the star of his own film is of course no surprise, but man does Noah Jupe give him a run for his money. They go toe to toe in this. I found myself watching the whole film wanting to give young Otis a hug. Also, remember when Lucas Hedges was in movies? Yeah, good times, I know. Honey Boy was one of them. He plays present-day Otis, so basically the Shia LaBeouf that we know today. So I have found his performance to be a particularly interesting watch because of that. And he nails the voice. He's pretty good as well.
You're a ridiculous person, you know that, right? You think you're fucking smart.
Although he's not given as much. He's mostly a frame for the film to look into the past through. Honey Boy was written as a means of therapy for Shia LaBeouf while he was in rehab, but the film ended up being something that a lot of people felt drawn to and seen by. It had a cathartic effect on a very large group of people. Director Alma Harrell was clearly a great collaborator and creative mind for this project, crafting a film that feels as warm and compassionate as it is heartbreaking and traumatic. It's a blend that's very tastefully executed and thought through, hinting at the lengths of care that was taken with the story at hand. At the end of the day, it might be Shia's story, but through their collaboration with Alma, the film has managed to hit a nerve with people from all walks of life, without seemingly sacrificing any idiosyncrasies of its painfully personal story. Going through old Letterboxd and IMDb reviews allowed me to really paint a picture on how much this film had meant to some. Granted, you'll find quirky reviews such as this saying, Alma Harrell did a better job than my therapist in 94 minutes, which I don't know if it's entirely sincere, but I'm also not interested in questioning it, because on the other side over at IMDb, you have very similar reviews. I don't think I've ever cried in front of my wife in the 15 years we have been together. I wish I could thank Shia for making this movie. It helped me more than any therapy session ever could. And there's so many more on both platforms. So it's safe to say that the film has resonated with a lot of people. Film critic Peter Bradshaw wrote in his review for The Guardian saying, If there's a LaBeouf to be had of whatever duration, then this may be the starting point. But 5 years later, we can safely say that this has not been the case. In 2020, just a year after Honey Boy's release, Honey Boy co-star and musician FKA Twigs came forward with some heavy allegations suing Shia LaBeouf for abusing her physically and mentally during their relationship, which had blossomed when they met on set for the film. This was a very sad and disappointing headline to read at that time, and the things FKA Twigs has accused him of are quite serious. Since then, Shia has made various statements about this lawsuit, even somewhat taking accountability for his alcoholism and aggressions and his habit of hurting people that are closest to him. While he was never really shy to talk about his problems and how flawed he was as a person, this lawsuit had showed that things were not looking any brighter, and it's quite upsetting. So, Honey Boy ruined? Well, this is the part in the video where I present you with some questions. And we're starting it off with the age-old question in art discourse: should you separate the art from the artist? Well, this is a question that we're faced with when talking about multiple artists and pieces of art. I believe that the answer can depend from artist to artist. What context is prompting you to want to consider separating the artist from their art? Is it something in their past? Something they have said or done after your engagement with their art? Is it their social and political beliefs, their hypocrisy in their work, or straight up a crime they have committed? Or does none of this matter? Can the piece of art exist without the context of its artist? Shouldn't our focus be on the value of the art rather than the flaws of the artist who created it? Or is it our moral duty to hold that artist accountable for their actions? I know I've been throwing a lot of questions your way, and maybe you've been answering them in light speed with a perhaps or a depends. But in my exploration of how Honey Boy has aged, I won't have a definitive answer. People should have their own conclusions with how they engage with it. This is not an ending explained video where we view art as something to figure out. So, with all that being said, let's focus back on Honey Boy. After FKA Twigs' allegations, director Alma Harrell came forward with her own statement. As a filmmaker and an artist, I'm drawn to stories that help us develop empathy for the messy parts of the human condition. Like many of Shia's collaborators and fans who have battled substance abuse, suffered childhood trauma, and faced mental illness, I am painfully aware of my past investment in his recovery. I want to send a clear message today that none of the above should excuse, minimize, or rationalize domestic violence. I'm grateful that survivors of childhood trauma have seen some aspects of themselves in Honey Boy and might feel less alone in their pain. I hope that they don't take these events as a discouraging moment in their own recovery. While Honey Boy wouldn't have existed without Shia, it has inevitably become something bigger than him through the sum of his collaborators. I personally feel like the film has been made with the right intentions, and I believe it can still exist in that way. Starting the film without the text based on a true story, or plastering something on the poster that says Honey Boy, a Shia LaBeouf story, and as well as using a pseudonym, I think were very conscious, creative decisions for the film. And I think it's a decision that allows the film to work and exist without us having to bring the outside context of Shia LaBeouf's life into it. Extremely personal pieces of art that hit a nerve universally is something that will never cease to amaze me. As I have said before, and Alma's statement touches upon this as well, a lot of people resonated deeply with the film, and I think that should still be able to exist. If you felt drawn to and found value in the work of someone whose actions you don't agree with, does it still mean you condone it? I personally don't think so. When it comes to ethical predicaments of support, I think we're already in support of far worse crimes with our tech, food, and clothing. But let me not get carried away here. Separating the art from the artist is, of course, nothing new, but I believe it became even more prominent with the start of what we call cancel culture, where people are expected to have a stance on an artist they might not particularly enjoy or have engaged with. Because otherwise the canceling wouldn't really work. People online would have to make their disappointment and disgust clear, supporting victims, have them be heard, and letting studio executives know that this shit does not fly with us. If you don't fire them, we stop supporting. What I'm trying to get at here is I think we're expected to have a stance on problematic artists now more than ever. It's maybe easy for you to shrug off X's work, but Y? That's an artist that has a special place in your heart, and it's maybe harder for you to separate them from the art that means so much to you. But for the other person, it might be vice versa. I cannot, and frankly am not interested in policing anyone's engagement with art. And in the case of Honey Boy, I am sure there are a lot of complicated feelings towards the film that has touched many in ways that a lot of films hope to achieve. However, that's not it. A whole other can of worms have been opened about the film when Shia LaBeouf went on John Bernthal's podcast to reveal that
I want to hit my dad up. Now here's a man who I done vilified on a grand scale and used him, juiced my dad is like, this is the reason I'm fucking foul out here. You know, I'm come from this wayward upbringing and, you know, my dad is the reason I'm such a fuck up. And I wrote this narrative, which was just fucking nonsense. My dad was so loving to me my whole life. Fractured, sure. Crooked, sure. Like, wonky for sure, but never was not loving, never was not there. And I done a world press tour about how fucked he was as a man.
First, I want to make clear that I won't be psychoanalyzing Shia LaBeouf. Because one, who the hell am I to do that? And two, I clearly don't know the guy, nor am I equipped to do that. Which you might think, yeah, of course. But this is YouTube, and the amount of YouTube channels dedicated to psychoanalyzing celebrities is crazy. There's a lot of them. Instead of a PhD, they have a YouTube plaque on the wall that I guess gives them the qualification. However, I do want to point out that abuse is obviously a very complex issue, and it's very normal for children to still love and want to protect their parents. I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but I think it's important to not view it as entirely black and white either, especially given Shia LaBeouf's complex history. In this video, when talking about Honey Boy, one of the main things I've been praising it for over and over again was its vulnerability and honesty. It's how I felt seeing it for the first time, and it's also been the clear consensus around the film. But if we were to go off of what Shia LaBeouf says on the podcast, it's anything but that. So, Honey Boy ruined again? The answer is clear. It's more questions. To start off, are films obligated to tell us the truth? And I'm clearly referring to films that deal with real life stories or figures, and excluding documentaries, of course. Films such as Oppenheimer, The Social Network, Wolf of Wall Street, are all films that use a larger-than-life figure to tell a story with themes that are even larger than the subject itself. And they're clearly heavily fictionalized retellings. Yeah, there might be some real-life set pieces and some moments of truth, but overall, reality rarely has that clear of a narrative. And as people, we're too complicated even for our own good and not tightly packaged moral lessons. So no, I don't think films are obligated to tell us the truth. However, Honey Boy's case is a bit different. It of course falls under a different category. It's an autobiographical film, meaning it was written by the person that the film is about. So maybe a more fitting question would be, is an autobiographical film obligated to tell us the truth? I mean, it's coming from the source, right? Well, then there's another label that we should consider, which is semi-autobiographical. Joanna Hogg's The Souvenir films as an example. They're heavily inspired by her own coming of age, but are essentially their own thing. So could Honey Boy fall under that category as well? I mean, his father might have been depicted differently, but so much of it is still true to his early childhood. I think at this point, when you get caught up with labels and how much of the film is real and how much isn't, you're not engaging with the art anymore. but more so with the context surrounding it. You're doing detective work, basically. As mentioned, the film uses a pseudonym for Shia and never explicitly says that the film is about him. The poster doesn't, the trailer doesn't, so overall, the marketing doesn't. The film is an Amazon Prime original, and the description for the film has no mention of this either. Same case for the IMDb synopsis. The film's press tour, on the other hand, seems to entirely revolve around it being Shia LaBeouf's story, and more specifically the story of his recovery. So no, it's not a secret, and a lot of people went into the film knowing this information. Ugh, but who cares? I feel as though I'm getting lost making it more convoluted than it needs to be. Whether it's in the synopsis or not, marketing or not, the film is more widely known as Shia LaBeouf's story than not. So maybe the main question to ask here is the simplest one. Does it ruin the film to find out that it's made up of lies? I am sure people's answer on this will depend from person to person. Maybe it will depend on your relationship with the film, or maybe you don't really care whether it's lies or not. And I think this is a good point to talk about my relationship with this film and how I feel it has aged for me. I rewatched Honey Boy before writing a single word for this video. I knew about the FKA Twigs allegations, but not their severity, and his appearance on the John Bernthal podcast where he talked about his father. And rewatching the film, I didn't have a crazy revelation about it, really. While I quite liked Honey Boy, it's not particularly a film I gravitated towards on an extremely deep level. It's fortunately something that I don't relate to. So in many ways, it was like watching a film that had someone who I stopped supporting because of the real life actions. And unfortunately, there's a lot of films that fall under that category. The thing I mostly caught myself thinking about was, I wonder how much of this is real. Which I'm pretty sure I was thinking about seeing the film for the first time. Because like with any film based on a real story or real person, you always have that thought in the back of your head. This time, obviously, that thought had a lot more weight to it, because I knew about the creative liberties that were taken for the film. But then that left me thinking, if this is made up, it's written quite well. And it's also directed very well. And it's also acted very well by the ensemble cast. It's also put together really well. Overall, there's a lot of great work at play here. I am doubling down on my point that the people that worked on this film have made it with a lot of compassion and empathy. I think ultimately the film is made with good intentions. Even if we were to say that Shia LaBeouf has written the film to manipulate people into feeling sorry for him, I would argue that the film has become bigger than him through his collaborators, and most importantly, the subject matter it explores. Similarly to how fragile masculinity is bigger than Mark Zuckerberg, or the American dream being bigger than Jordan Belfort. This story about childhood trauma and abuse is simply bigger than Shia LaBeouf. So Honey Boy still works as a film about that, but it is less so the LaBeoufissance, or the Hollywood child actor comeback story. If we were to take a few steps back and consider this film in its wider context of why and how it was made, I think it becomes a more puzzling piece. But once again, I'm not interested in speculating the psyche of Shia LaBeouf when he made this. And I think that is a boring way of looking at a film that deals with the topics that it deals with. What do you think? I'm genuinely very interested to know what people will have to say about this. But overall, here's my take, and thank you for spending your time with me. I hope you enjoyed it. My next video will be on dubstep in film.